Dave listens to hi-fi. Dave listens to hi-fi.
Hello, bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue. Thank you for tuning in to Dave Listens to Hi-Fi. So today I want to talk about a new amplifier that I've been spending the last couple months with. It's the Galion TS34 integrated tube amplifier. So Galion Audio is the audio brand from Thomas and Stereo. Now Thomas has a brilliant ear and he really knows what he likes as well. So that's a great combination because he can tune his stuff to be precisely what he thinks it should be. These amps are very versatile often, especially the integrated amps. You've got tone controls and multiple inputs and everything, and so I'll talk about that later. But Thomas produces these great amps with kind of unique features. So today we're talking about the TS34 integrated tube amp. The first big product from Galion Audio was TS120. So that used KT120 output tubes, and it was I think 60 watts per channel or something, beefier amp. The TS34 is similar footprint, similar looking amp, but it uses EL34 tubes, as its name would suggest. So it produces lower output, but the EL34 tubes have more of right from the Galion website here. EL34 tubes offer a distinct sonic profile compared to KT88 tubes used in the TS120. In essence, the TS34 is a lively, happy, and faster sounding amp. Think of the TS120 as a sports car, and the TS34 would be an agile go-kart. So the TS34, because it uses the smaller output tubes, its power ratings are a little bit lower. 25 watts Class A, 40 watts Class AB, so I'll get into that a little bit later, but switchable Class A and Class AB. THD 0.32% at 1 kilohertz, and Class AB 0.08%. Now the amps are rated at 25 watts in pure Class A, switchable to Class AB at 40 watts. You heard people talking about tube power and solid state power. Tube power is said to be more powerful. I really don't know the mechanism of it, but here's what I tried. I have the TS34. I chose to listen to it mostly in Class A. It is rated at 25 watts per channel. I have a PDA 3116 D2 little Class D board. I'm running at 20 volts, and in that configuration at 8 ohms it's supposed to put out about 50 watts per channel, so double the power of the TS34. I played both amps. I did a little test around them around 75, 78 dB in my room, and the TS34 played it no problem. The little Class D amp on the same set of speakers really started to lose the low end and started to sound really harsh once I got up above 70 dB or so. The TS34, no problem. It was able to pump out that power. So that's 25 watts compared to 50 watts solid state. Comparable? We'll see. Most of my listening was at the lower end. I do a lot of my listening later at night, so it's, barely above 60 dB, sometimes a bit less. So different constraints on the amps. Sometimes on the weekends or earlier in the evenings, I'm pushing it a little bit. But by no means is this an exhaustive test of the maximum power output. But the 25 dB, you have headroom, you have plenty of power, and if you need to go a little bit louder, it's there. On the back, you've got 4 ohm and 8 ohm taps, so different taps off the output transformers, depending on the impedance of your speakers. My speakers, I think, are closer to 6 ohms. I tried them in both. I generally preferred the 4 ohm taps, but they're both there. Try them both on whatever speakers you're running and quickly figure out which ones are more suitable for you. Now, in terms of inputs on the TS34, you've got 4 line inputs and a home theater bypass. I think it eliminates the volume control and allows you to control the volume from an external source, so a home theater processor or something. I don't have a TV anywhere near my system. It's strictly 2 channels, so I wasn't able to test the home theater input if you need it, it's probably very useful for you. There's also a stereo sub out, which is nice because you have the two channels. In terms of the tube complement, there are 4 output tubes, DL34. The preamplifier section has 212AX7, 212AT7. The output tubes that Thomas has supplied with this one was Pizane EL34s, and then TAD selected tubes for the input section. As it was, amplifier sounded really good with the stock tubes. I mean, it was really good. I think if you bought this amp, certainly be losing nothing by running it with the stock tubes. You could try tube rolling. I think you would probably get a different flavor. I'm not sure if you would see a great improvement the way it is set up, but you could certainly try. But if you wanted to just run the tubes that came with it, those are the tubes that Thomas designed the amp around, so it's going to really sound the way he likes it in that. And I think you would be well served to run it with its stock tube complement. Of course, if you have other tubes lying around and you want to try those out, go ahead. I'm sure you'll have some different results, but I only tried them with these tubes that were supplied, and they were plenty good. Now, in terms of power consumption, I plugged it in Class A. Once you turn it on, you get a bit of a spike, and then it seems to warm up and settle around 160 watts consumption in the Class A. For fun, I tried it in the Class AB, and it uses about 137 watts, so not a big difference in terms of power consumption because you're still running the tube filaments and everything. I think just the amount of biasing into the tubes. Choose the output class based on what you like to hear. Power consumption is really negligible between the two. That 160 watts that's being used, it does go somewhere. The transformer gets hot, the tubes get hot. In my listening room, I don't have other pets or little children coming down and touching things, so it was fine. But it is hot enough to be uncomfortable in the hands, so if you do have a situation where someone might be putting their hands on it, he does have a tube guard, like a cage, available for purchase. So the TS34 really is built quite well. I mean, it's got a good weight to it. Say you're buying a nice set of Class D mono blocks. They're compact, they're energy efficient, they're punchy, they sound great, they run cool. All those things are benefits. But when you spend a lot of money and you get two little boxes that weigh 2 pounds each, and you spent a couple grand on them, sure, they sound great, but probably in the back of your mind you're thinking, the sound quality's there for the money, but am I really getting my money's worth? There's nothing to it. When you buy the TS34, this thing's big, it's heavy, it's got a lot of iron in the transformers, uses power, it gets hot, it's got a lot of features. When you buy it, you're not going to pick it up and think, did I get ripped off? No, you're going to say, this is a lot of amp for the money. I mean, it's physically a lot of amp for the money. Now, when you open it up and you look inside, you're going to see how it's built. There's small transformers on the inside. The big transformers are on the outside. You can see there's plenty of capacitance inside, nice shielding around the input. And then one thing that Thomas does is he really includes a lot of high quality parts, especially capacitors and resistors. So when you look inside, you'll see he has not skimped on the parts quality. Probably far higher quality than anything else in this comparable price range. And he really does that. And I've seen his process a little bit where he does a lot of listening, and he changes parts qualities and parts values a little bit, mostly just to get the sound that he wants, because he has a great ear and he knows the sound that he wants. It's validated by measurements afterwards, but primarily he's putting in really good components to give it the quality of sound that he really specifies. So what does it actually sound like? Well, when I first put the amp in my system, my initial reaction was anger. This amp made me mad. I've been spending years getting components, buying, selling, trading, trying different components in my system, working up my way as we all do, making improvements and finding a reference. So, I got some components that I really enjoy the sound of. Good synergy, everything works well together. And then I put the TS34 in my system, and it just sounded phenomenal. And this is like the third or fourth in a row components from Galion Audio that I've put in my system and have been really good, like very exceptional. And it just, it just seemed too easy. I was angry at Thomas that he just made it seem too easy. Obviously it wasn't. I know he's put a lot of time and effort into figuring out these amps and rejecting some products because they weren't up to his standards, and really developing the ones that he liked. So I recognize the effort, but initially I was like, how can he do it? How can he make this so good? So I initially very impressed. It has a fullness and a richness and a extension and a dimensionality. It's a really transparent sounding amp. Just initial impressions is like when you meet someone who's very gregarious and outgoing and smiles and looks you in the eye and asks you questions. It's a very engaging amp. It took a bunch of listening to try to tease out what the high points and low points of it were. But overall, arcing overview, it's a really good amp. So one of the first songs I listened to on it, I had been watching Professor Rock on YouTube, and he was talking about the Fleetwood Mac song Sarah, and kind of the backstory of the song. So I just had to listen to it. So when I put it on the TS34, it was very full sounding. It was very dimensional. So like the sounds laid across the soundstage, especially with my reference, it places things very precisely. Each sound source is almost a point source, like the sound emerges from that space. With the TS34, the sound sources have dimension to them. They have thickness and width and height. They're more fleshed out. It really gives a full 3D volume to each individual sound across the soundstage. My reference is more precise in the placement of instruments, whereas the TS34 is a bit more vague. If you ever close your eyes listening to live music, that's more what it sounds like. It's hard to hear imaging often in a live performance. You close your eyes, you listen, and the music's there, but it's a little bit more difficult to pinpoint where things are often in a live setting. Initial impressions with Fleetwood Mac, very dimensional was really the biggest word I had in my notes. I also listened to Paul Chambers. When I put on the TS34, I found the piano had more body to it. You could hear the wood and the volume inside the piano more than kind of the springs and the action. My reference didn't sound lightweight at all, but it was just there was other things that were kind of more dominating the sound of the piano, and that gave it a different character when I was listening to it. I also listened to the song Yesterdays from this album, and Paul Chambers, he bows the bass, and really one thing that was emphasized with the TS34 was the emotion. And when he's driving the bow across the strings and he really leans into it, just that's the sense of the bow vibrating, and just where he catches the right resonance and digs it deep into the strings, the emotion that's expressed with that, the microdynamics as well in the recordings, and the emotion really came through nicely with the TS34. Now the bass was, certainly these tubes are not big powerful tubes, and they're not going to plumb the very depths of the bass, but it was entirely satisfying in comparison to my reference that did have about double the power, 50 watts Class A instead of 25, and it is solid state. It does go deeper, it does go quicker, it does a bit more definition. But listening to the TS34 initially or in isolation, you wouldn't get any sense that you're missing anything in the bass. It's big and round and full and defined. But just in comparison with some others that are exceptional in that area, it's not going to be best in class, but it's certainly satisfying. Now to get some more electronic poppy music, I put on this album, Yes, 90125. Now it may be a bit of a controversial stance, but this may be my favorite Yes album. And let me explain. So when I was forming my initial music tastes, early teens, this album came out. This was really kind of my introduction, my gateway into Yes. I've listened to this album so many times. I remember buying this at HMV. Like, all the songs on it are really strong in my opinion, and this is, I really love it's a great recording. It's catchy, it's complex. It does all the great things that Yes does, and it was really my introduction to the band. And then I went into their back catalog and I heard all the wonderful things that they did as well that brought them to the forefront. This was almost a rebirth of the band at that point, but just because of the way that my impression of the band formed, this one really gets top billing for me. I mean, listening to Changes, the TS34, I mean, really full and rich, lots of great mid-bass, kick drum, had good slam to it, good impact. And you know, for what was kind of a poppy electronic 80s album, a lot of texture and a lot of space in the recording that you could hear, and that's a wonderful thing. I mean, you know, I've seen on some forums recently people talking about, oh, you know, the music I listen to isn't well recorded, so maybe my system doesn't need to be that great. I've kind of found the inverse. You know, I've also heard people saying, oh, really good systems, they're so revealing that you can't listen to bad recordings with them. I've found that the better your equipment, the more you can hear into the recording and the more you can appreciate how good the recording is, whereas it may not seem like it's really well recorded on a not good system. Once you step it up a couple levels and you put something in, it can really bring out all the details you hadn't heard before. That's what the TS34 did for me with this album. I mean, I've heard it so many times, but just having the emphasis in the dimensionality and kind of that emotion and texture that the tube amp really brings out, made me appreciate the things, those things in this recording that were there. Almost emphasizes the organic elements in the recording. And so it was a kind of a different way of hearing this album, and I really appreciated it. So it was while I was listening to the Yes album that I started to play around with the speaker taps on the back of the amp. There's a 4 ohm tap and an 8 ohm tap, and you're supposed to hook those up according to the impedance of your speakers. My speakers are rated, I think, around 6 ohms. Of course, it varies across the frequency spectrum, but they're kind of a nominal 6 ohm. So really, I felt it gave me the flexibility to try either one. And I tried both of them. I kind of settled on the 4 ohm. It seemed to accentuate the bass and the treble a little bit, a bit more of a V curve. It just sounded a little bit more fun to listen to in the 4 ohm. So that's entirely speaker dependent. On my speakers, I like the 4, but certainly try both when you have the amp in your system. I was also playing with the tone controls. There's a tone control A, tone control B, and then there's the T in the middle, and in the T, a bass and a treble control that are active. So I tried all three. Bass and treble control, I'm not a big fan of. I know some people like it. They use it for different recordings, whatever. I like to listen to the recording. The way it sounds is the way it sounds. To me, you can't really separate the performance from the recording. It comes all together. It's all in one. And so if something has too much bass or not enough bass, I just kind of absorb it as that's how the song is. So I don't like adjusting the bass and treble too much. But the tone control A and B gave a different character. It also increases the volume one to the other. So as you switch back and forth, you'll have to readjust the volume just so you can make fair comparisons. So you're not just listening to one that's louder and you think it's better because of that. You make the switch, adjust the volume, listen. I kept coming back to the B. What I'm going to be telling you about is with the tone control in the B, and also I ran it mostly in Class A. So the next album I listened to, back to some acoustic, organic music, Alice Coltrane. I had heard bits of this album on Spotify, based on some other music that I was listening to, and I really dug some of the music on this album, and I had been looking for it for a long time. I finally found it when I was in Greece, in Crete, of all places. So I picked that up. And the sound of this, it was really emphasized all the harmonics. I mean, all the different instruments we used. It was the overtones and the harmonics of the sounds. I mean, because you can play the same note on a piano or on a trumpet or a saxophone or a guitar. You play the exact same frequency, the exact same note. They're all going to sound different. And what's different is the harmonic structure, all the overtones, all the intensities, the relative intensities of all the overtones of that note. And that really seemed to be emphasized or more noticeable when listening to the TS34. All the instruments sounded very rich, and you could really tell them apart separately, and the sense of space was there as well. So music like this was especially organic and interesting and engaging when listening to it on the TS34. Another album I pulled out, hadn't actually probably been several years since I actually pulled this album out and listened to it. The thing that struck me when listening to this with the Galion amp was how dynamic it was. Like, this is a really, really dynamic sounding album. It just like, it's very impressive. And even though it's only a 25 watt amp and my speakers are not particularly efficient, when you have the source that will produce those dynamics, you're going to hear it. And that's what made listening to this really fun with that amp as well. I was listening to it kind of late at night, and I had to kind of ride the volume just so I could hear everything, because the loud parts were too loud, and then the quiet parts really got quiet and delicate, and I had to turn it up because the amp can do so much with it. Another thing that really impressed me was there's some string sections. It's background instrumentation, but when you hear it, it's not just a mass of strings. You can actually pick out all the instruments, all the different violins and cellos and everything in the string section individually, even though it is set far back in the mix. The resolution and the dynamics of TS34 really made this a fun album to listen to as well. And then I'll have to just tell you about Better Servert. This is a newer album, certainly a newer album than the Alan Parsons Project, but still dated at this point. But to put this album on, the upper mid-range seemed more prominent. It seemed brighter sounding, but that just kind of gave it some extra detail. But when you step back and you, rather than nitpicking all of the different elements of the sound, when you step back and you say, what does this make me feel? What does this sound like overall? On the Galion, the songs sounded longer. The songs sounded a bit more drawn out. I listened to a full song on the Galion, and then I listened to a full song on my reference. And on the Galion, the songs sounded longer, more drawn out, not slower, but just, I don't know, maybe because there was more detail, I was paying more attention to it or something, but it just made them sound more drawn out and epic almost. So, I've never experienced that before. Let me know in the comments if you've ever heard a component do that, because that was a first for me. Most of the testing was on my Carver Amazing speakers. Big speakers, lower efficiency, takes some power, but like I said, the TS34 was well up to the task of playing them. I have a set of Noresco speakers using some German drivers that are very high efficient, at least 95, 97 if you believe the specs that I looked up on the internet. And the bass in these speakers is pretty compromised. It's pretty colored because it's a very weak box. It resonates, and it doesn't. The drivers don't go down that low, but it's very, very efficient speakers. So I like to use them to test some amps to see how they deal with high efficiency speakers. And those speakers actually sounded better on the TS34 because their bass is compromised because of the resonances and the lack of really low end and the boominess of the box. My solid state amp that reaches quite low down and has quite powerful bass, it's seems to emphasize the things that are wrong with those speakers in the low end, whereas the TS34 played better with them. if I was to use those speakers in my system kind of a long term, I would be looking more at an amp like the TS34 rather than my solid state power amp. I also tried a set of triangle speakers and had similar comments compared to everything else that I've talked about. I did play around with the tone controls again, and interestingly I chose the B tone control, and I was trying to figure out why, because they sound very different from my other speakers, and so I thought I would use a different tone control, a different tone setting. I'm not sure if I just prefer the amp in that setting, or if kind of all the speakers have some sort of element about them that I recognize that I like, and it seems to play best with the B tone control. But I don't know. When you're trying out this amp, make sure to switch back and forth and try the different tone controls, because you do get different flavors, and there was definitely one setting that I preferred. I also tried a little bit with the Class A, B settings. It is easy to switch back and forth. You just press the button on the front, and then you switch the classes, and then you press bias, and the amp's going to go through its thing and self-bias the tubes. It's an easy process, just a little sequence you have to remember. It's in the manual anyway, and you can do it from the remote as well. So it's very handy to maintain the amp's condition and maintain the bias of the tubes, and also it's really handy to be able to switch back and forth between Class A and Class AB. So I did a little bit of listening in Class AB. I preferred overall the Class A. It seems to have lost some of the magic, is what I wrote here. It's not as cohesive. The soundstage flattened a bit. And my conclusions from this were that listening to Class AB, you're better off if you have speakers that require the extra power, and if your music choice is more punchy rather than atmosphere. I read a comment today on a video where someone was saying soundstage isn't that important because they listen to electronic music and they just want tone and dynamics. So if you're that kind of listener, maybe the Class AB is better for you in this case. But for me personally, the way I listened, it was Class A all the way. So there you have it, the Galion Audio TS34. Really a wonderful little amp. I was surprised how good it was, how transparent it was, and it was really interesting the way that it could give a different character to the music. Dynamic, full range, revealing, very quiet as well. Not a ton of power, but for what it does really well. Again, another fantastic product from Galion Audio. So thank you for Thomas for lending it to me and letting me try it out. I hope you enjoyed watching it. I hope you enjoyed hearing about it. Thank you for tuning in to Dave Listens to Hi-Fi. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking the video. Leave me a comment if there's anything you want to know, or any comments you have on the video or other things. Please leave me a comment. I read all my comments. I strive to respond to all of them as well. So I love engaging with the viewers. Stay tuned. I've got another amp back there that I'm listening to, some more Canadian hi-fi, which I'm pleased to see is still alive and well. I'm going to be at the Toronto Audio Fest pretty soon, so if you see me there, come and say hi. I'd love to meet people who watch my videos in person. I'd love to engage and hear what you think. Take care. Thanks for watching. See you next time.